I usually use a four-step approach to solve any SQL question that works for me. You can certainly change and move things around the way it works for you in your own personalized way. Um, the way I like to solve a question is in four simple steps. Step one, understand the data. Two, put down some assumptions and talk the process and thoughts to your interviewer so you can keep the conversation going, and talk through the logic in simple sentences. It's not the actual query. And then start writing the query. As you keep discussing, there are more clarifying questions you might want to ask. Just certainly add them, go back and forth. Use your own pace, and let's get started. Um, the title of this question is distance per dollar. You're given a data set of Uber riders rides with the traveling distance to travel, and cost for each ride. First, find the difference between the distance per dollar for each date and the average distance per dollar for that year month. So you're computing the distance per dollar at a date level, and then you're computing the distance per dollar at a year month level. You might have to extract the year month from the date and then compute. Use the calculated difference on each day to calculate absolute average distance in distance per dollar metric on a monthly basis. So you're computing the difference between the date level distance to cost and the month level distance to cost, and doing an absolute average difference of those two. The output should include the year, month, and the absolute average distance in distance per dollar. You should also count both success and failed request status, as the distance and cost values are populated for all ride requests. Whether the trip is successful or not, you want to compute this average for both kinds of requests, because ultimately it's the cost for Uber. Also assume that all the dates are unique in the data set. Order your results by earliest request date first. I want to put together my thoughts and start writing down the logic. Look at the table here. It's a simple table with 6 fields with distance traveled per Uber trip. We have the cost associated and distance traveled by the driver as well. Not sure we're really going to use that. And then we have some of the assumptions or clarifying questions, however you want to call it. How do we tackle null values? Ignore them for this criteria, or replace with median, however the interviewer wants you to tackle that. I do want to ask about, since there is a denominator involved, if there are zeros in denominator, which is a monetary cost, how ignore them. That's the assumption, unless the interviewer asks you otherwise. So the logic I want to follow here is, right off the bat, we need to extract year month. So keep that out there. Compute distance to cost at date level. Then compute distance to cost. Sorry, there's some sticky key out there. Distance to cost at month level, and finally get the absolute difference of 2 and 3. Okay. Then round it off. Find out the average of 4 and round to 2 decimal places. Okay, so now start writing down the query. You can certainly go back and forth and talk about more assumptions you might have or clarifying questions you might have. I want to call my first CTE as distance to cost at a month level, at a date level. So I'm going to keep it that and select request date. Want to make sure it is in the date format and extract the year month from request date. So I'm going to copy that as well. Choose the format that you need from the expected output and call this year month. You want to make sure this is a float. So you're going to say decimal. All right. So now you want distance to travel, or you can just copy from here if that's easier. Distance to travel over monetary cost. It's always better to copy because we want the fields to be correct or it'll throw apart your logic, indicating some syntax error. So we want to call this distance to cost. Okay. From Uber request logs. You can copy the table name from here as well. It's easier. There's no real aggregation here, so we're gonna close this right here. However, you want to make sure we are using some edge cases, covering those edge cases. I want to say I don't want situations where this distance to travel is null and denominator is equal to 0. So I'm going to call those out. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, but for a month level or year month level. So I'm going to say 2 and distance to cost month level. Okay. And we don't need the request date out here. The conditions will still apply, but we're going to change these to sum. Sum. Also make it decimal. Oh, got it in the wrong place. Okay. Now we are going to get an aggregation at a month level. So we need to use group by 1. So 1 is nothing but the year month. So now we want very similar situation where we calculate the average of 1 and 2. Okay, so we're going to call this absolute difference. Absolute difference. So we already have the year month computed. We're going to keep that, and then we say absolute difference of call this year month to be more precise. Compute the difference of distance to cost at month level and the distance to cost at date level. And we're going to copy the table name here, call it A. And I only want the records which are common in both tables to keep it simple and do not bring in any null values, easy for computation. We already have these conditions, so we're not really worried about that. It's not an aggregation really. And say on A dot year month, B dot year month. Here we want to make sure it is a decimal value as well. Okay. Absolute difference, let's call that. And finally, what is the kind of expected output we need is basically year month. And we want the average of absolute value, absolute difference, sorry, and average of absolute difference, let's call it that. And copy the last CTE and group by one, order by one, and ascending order as needed. Okay, so looks like we got all the pieces together. Check for the keywords and indentation. Indentation looks good. Indentation looks good. Aliases. These are some of the quality checks I use. The aliases really come into play here, where you are using two different tables. So, okay. Yep. So check the aliases here. I'm going to bring in the year month from the first table. This is from the second table. And that's pretty much it. Okay. Let's try and run this code. Yep, it looks good. We got the output as needed. Um, we want to make sure it is two decimal places. It is actually two decimal places. So let's see if it's accepted. Okay, it's solved. That's perfect. However, I would like to use this new feature in Claude and say, optimize the below query and paste all that you have. It's going to give you a much simpler way, condense some of the steps. Um, yeah, you can start practicing these condensed steps and the more optimized way according to however you like.